Good evening, wanderer of thought. Welcome to this soft corner of time where memory, myth and history blend into a gentle haze. You're safe here. Your body is still, and the night, like a quiet companion, waits beside you. The world has quieted down. The mind may still wander, but now we guide it gently. Tonight we journey far back, not just centuries, not just civilizations, but deep into the roots of human curiosity, into something green, fragrant, slightly smoky, and long misunderstood. Tonight we're asking a surprisingly delicate question. When did people actually start smoking weed? It's an idea that makes people smile, chuckle, raise an eyebrow. But beneath the cloud of jokes and modern meaning lies something older, something ritualistic, mysterious, deeply human. Before the joint, before the pipe, before the laws, the debates, the music albums and the posters, there were hands that plucked a plant from the soil, hands that dried it, burned it, inhaled it, and slowly, perhaps with surprise or with intention, drifted into a different state of mind. This wasn't recreation as we know it. It wasn't a rebellion. Often it wasn't even called weed. It was medicine. It was magic. It was spirit. And the places where this began, well, they might surprise you. Far from the glossy lights of modern dispensaries, we find a tent on a cold steppe in Central Asia, filled with smoke and the low hum of chants. We find seeds tucked into the pouches of ancient mummies. We find inscriptions in clay, incense on altars, and strange-smelling rooms inside tombs. We even find taxes, yes, taxes, on jars filled with cannabis resin in places where emperors ruled and healers whispered. Cannabis, this humble plant, has been with us for a long, long time, not just as medicine or fibre, not only as a way to relieve pain or weave ropes, but sometimes simply to feel different, to feel the world tilt slightly, to soften its edges, to touch something divine, or at least unfamiliar. The story of cannabis is not one of constant highs. It is a slow unfolding of human need, the need to soothe, to understand, to escape, to heal, to connect. But our goal tonight isn't to dazzle with data. It's not to argue or persuade. It's to let you drift, softly, calmly, through a series of scenes spread across centuries and deserts and mountains and river valleys. We're going to trace the vapor trail of history, slowly, carefully, until it curls like incense smoke around your thoughts and lulls you into rest. We will walk through prehistoric villages where hemp seeds were buried with the dead. We will sit beside Scythian warriors in tents filled with cannabis smoke, their rituals part battle, part trance. We will sit bitter green bhang in sacred Indian ceremonies and listen to Daoist monks grind cannabis leaves into elixirs. We will linger in medieval gardens where hashish was whispered about like an old secret friend. And we will follow this strange and fragrant thread all the way through time into modern borders and broken laws, into misunderstood cultures and medical rediscoveries. Because this isn't just a plant, it's a mirror, one that has reflected human desires for thousands of years, our pain, our joy, our quest to touch the ineffable. And through that mirror we may glimpse something very old, something gentle, something worth falling asleep with. So, if you're still awake, wondering when the first spark was struck, when the first leaf was burned, when the first lungs filled with that earthy, hazy smoke, rest easy. You're not alone. You're following in the quiet footsteps of generations, a trail of breath and ash and leaf and silence. Tonight, we follow that trail together. Let's begin. As you settle into the quiet of the evening, allow your mind to drift across time and terrain, from lush valleys to high plateau steppes, and picture a single green plant rising from the soil, leaves spread like a fan, wind teasing its edges. That plant is Cannabis sativa and its relatives, and tonight we explore its origin, its differences, and the journey from wild growth to the cultivated fields of humans. Botanists and archaeologists generally agree that the cannabis plant is native to Central Asia, particularly the vast steppes that stretch across what is now Western China, Mongolia, Russia, and the Himalayan foothills. For millions of years before humans arrived, proto-cannabis plants would have grown in harsh conditions, shifting climates, cold winters, dry summers, rocky soils. These tough ancestors adapted. They developed flexible growth, resilient seeds, and the ability to spread in wide zones. Some genetic studies suggest the lineage of cannabis diverged millions of years ago, though the domesticated forms we work with today are far more recent. Because the plant could survive in marginal lands, it spread widely on its own before humans ever touched it. The plants grew where few others did, along riverbanks, in abandoned fields, at the edge of forest and steppe. Over time, people began to notice them. The strong fibres in the stems, the seeds full of oil, the sticky clumps of resin, perhaps used for scent or healing. Thus began the slow process of human-plant partnership. When you hear the names cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, or hemp, you're hearing echoes of how humans have tried to sort and use this plant. Here's a simpler breakdown. Cannabis sativa is the name often given to the taller, more slender plants originally from warmer climates, places like Southeast Asia or parts of Central Asia. Cannabis indica is often the name used for plants coming from cooler, mountainous regions like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Tibet. Plants which are shorter, bulkier, with broad leaves and typically quicker to flower. Then there's industrial hemp. These are varieties grown mainly for fibre or seed oil, with very low levels of the psychoactive compound THC. They may belong to the same species or a related one. Botanists still debate how many true species of cannabis there are. In practice, the labels sativa and indica serve more as handy guides than strict botanical truths, because plants have interbred for centuries and the differences blur. But the key idea is simple. Some plants were built more for tall fibre growth, some for resin and resinous flowers, some for cold climate survival. Imagine the earliest cannabis plants swaying in the wind of the ancient steppe, hardy and self-sufficient, sprouting where few other plants could. Then humans arrive, herders, hunter-gatherers, farmers. They notice the plant, they gather its seeds, they use its fibres, they may burn it in ritual or scent, and gradually they begin to select it. In warmer climates, people might prefer the tall stalks for rope and cloth, so they keep plants with long stems and strong fibres. In colder regions, or places where resin mattered, people choose the bushier plants with more sticky trichomes, those little resin glands. Over generations, human selection makes a difference. Plants flower earlier, seeds drop more reliably, fibres become smoother, and resins become stronger. Climate played a big role. As people moved northward, they needed plants that flowered even in shorter summers. Some wild cannabis populations adapted, and those traits were harnessed. One study notes that cannabis has wild and domesticated populations, with differences like smaller seeds, long dormancy in wild ones, and easy shattering seed behaviour, traits ideal for wild survival, less ideal for farming. So you can imagine, a human in ancient days says, "This plant drops seed too fast, we can't harvest easily." They then favour plants that hold seed longer or flower later, and gradually we move toward domestication. Over time, cannabis becomes not just a wild weed, but a companion crop, grown, harvested, stored. And because humans liked using many parts of it, fibre, seed oil and resin, the plant evolved under human influence in multiple directions. The story of this plant isn't just botanical, it's deeply human. By understanding its origin, we see how humans encountered wild nature and then shaped it. We see how climate shaped human choices, cold versus warm zones, and how plants adapted and humans adapted in turn. the cannabis plant became an actor in the human story, not only a rope maker or cloth source, but a medicine, a ritual plant, a source of change. So now, as you lie comfortably and your breath slows, imagine the wild cannabis plants of Central Asia, tall, broad-leaved, swaying in wind. Imagine the herder noticing them, then dragging stalks home, the farmer selecting seeds, the plant shifting shape over generations. Think of the mountain valleys, the river banks, the steppe grasses. Think of a plant turning wild into useful, silent into symbolic. Next, we will move from the plant itself into how people first used it, not just as fibre or food, but in early ritual and smoke. We will travel through ancient burial grounds, tents of steam, the moment when a human tipped a bud into flame and inhaled. But for now, rest in the green world of possibility. The plant exists. The people notice. The story begins. Take a breath. Feel the leaves in your mind's eye. Let your thoughts soften. Let your body become still. We will continue soon. Let your breath settle again. Slow, soft, unhurried. Now we drift even farther back in time, before temples, before written language, before kings or stories were carved in stone. We go back to a time when humans lived close to the earth, when firelight was the centre of evening life, when tools were shaped from bone and stone, and memories were carried in the body rather than in books. Here, in these early human settlements, scattered across wide plains and river valleys, we find some of the first hints of the relationship between people and the cannabis plant. Not smoking yet, not inhalation, not even ritual in the way we might imagine today, but touch and use and curiosity. Archaeologists have found traces of hemp fibres dating back more than 10,000 years. That is older than the pyramids, older than the oldest written story. It reaches back to the dawn of farming itself. One discovery came from Taiwan, tiny fragments of hemp cord pressed into the surface of ancient pottery. A fingerprint of human hands twisting plant fibres into string. Imagine it. A person kneeling on the ground, rolling the stem between their palms, coaxing it into a thread to sew, to tie, to weave. No ceremony, just daily life. But the relationship had begun. Far to the north, in the cold expanses of Siberia, archaeologists uncovered hemp seeds in prehistoric burial sites. Small seeds, carefully placed beside the dead. Seeds do not preserve by accident. They were placed with intention. Source. What kind of intention? We do not know for certain, but we can imagine. Perhaps the seeds were offered as food. Hemp seeds are rich in oils and nutrients. Or perhaps they were given as a tool, a plant the living believed might be useful in the next world. Or perhaps they were placed there for ritual reasons, something spiritual, something symbolic, something whispered rather than spoken. Even before humans smoked cannabis, they were thinking about it. Before cannabis was used to change the mind, it was used to shape the world. Hemp fibres are naturally strong, some of the strongest plant fibres known. Ancient people found they could twist them into rope, braid them into nets, weave them into cloth. The plant was useful, durable, and dependable. Picture early settlements. Women weaving, men tying rope for fishing lines, shelters patched with hemp cloth, baskets reinforced by hemp twine. This was a plant that helped survival, that made life a little easier, a little more structured, a little more secure. And when something becomes useful, people stay close to it. They plant it. They carry seeds on journeys. They trade it. So cannabis slowly spread, not because someone discovered how to smoke it, but because someone needed string. There is something quietly beautiful in that. Hemp seeds also became a food source. They are rich in fats and protein, precious nutrients in ancient worlds, where winters were long and food was not always easy to find. People crushed the seeds into paste, scattered them into meals, stored them for lean seasons, and eventually they noticed that different parts of the plant had different effects. Perhaps a healer sitting by a hearth of glowing embers watched resin cling sticky to the fingers. Perhaps someone placed the resin near a flame and noticed the scent. Perhaps it eased pain. Perhaps it softened grief. Perhaps it slowed the breath during mourning rituals. We cannot say for certain, but the pattern suggests possibility. Even at this early stage, cannabis was not just a resource, but a plant that humans paid attention to. They handled it, observed it, learned from it. The beginnings of ritual, the beginnings of medicine, were hovering nearby. They were not loud, not sudden. They were slow-dawning realizations like mist lifting at sunrise. This is important to remember. For thousands of years, cannabis was used without being burned and inhaled. The idea of smoking cannabis, breathing in its altered effect, came much later and in very specific cultural settings. The early human relationship was mostly practical. We use the fibers, we eat the seeds, we store it through the winter, we bury it with our dead. The plant did not yet lead to vision or trance. It led to shelter, sustenance, continuity. But the seeds placed with the dead, the careful arrangement, the gentle thought of carrying something into the afterlife, that suggests a seed of meaning beyond survival, a soft beginning of sacredness. Night has fallen. A small community sits around a fire. Stars scatter across a quiet sky. Someone pulls thread through a garment. Someone else cracks hemp seeds with their teeth. A child watches sparks swirl upward, wondering where they go. The cannabis plant lies nearby, drying in bundles, waiting to be useful. No one speaks of it as magic, yet the seeds sit carefully in baskets. They are treasured, not worshipped, but valued. This is where the story begins, not with smoke or euphoria or music, but with care. And all of human history with this plant grows gently from that care. Soon, very soon, we will move into the moment when the relationship changes, when humans not only touch the plant, but inhale it, when they learn that the plant not only clothes the body, but also opens the mind. We will step into burial mounds in the grasslands, where the air glows with fragrant smoke. We will watch warriors and shamans gather in circles, eyes closed, breathing deeply, moving into altered states. We will witness the first smoke, but not yet. For now, rest with the earliest world, where the plant was a companion, silent and kind, a provider, a partner, a quiet presence at the edge of firelight. Take a breath. Let it go. The journey continues soon. Let us drift now into a different kind of moment in history, a moment where cannabis begins to change, where the plant is no longer just fibre or food or something quietly placed in a grave. Here, cannabis becomes smoke, breath, sensation, a doorway to something beyond the everyday. We're travelling now to the Central Asian steppes, wide open grasslands where the wind moves like an endless tide. This is the land of the Scythians, nomadic horse riders, archers, and travellers of great distance. They lived not in stone cities, but in movement. Their homes were tents, their paths were sky and horizon, their lives shaped by travel, trade, and battle. It was these people, restless, skilled, and deeply spiritual, who left us some of the first clear evidence of cannabis being inhaled for its mind-altering effects. Around the 5th century BCE, the Greek historian Herodotus travelled among different cultures and listened to their customs. When he encountered stories about the Scythians, he recorded something unusual. He wrote that the Scythians would enter small tents, place hemp seeds and flowers over heated stones, and then inhale the rising smoke. Inside the tent the air thickened, warm, scented, carrying something more than simple heat. Herodotus described how the Scythians shouted for joy during these rituals. But his words should not be taken as loudness. Ancient languages often use joy to describe release, relief, or the opening of the mind. No pipes, no rolled leaves, no flames held to buds. This was steam, heavy smoke, a hot box, long before the word existed. The tent was small, sealed, warm. The air inside became a kind of cloud, one shared by all who sat close together. This was not a party, not a joke or a casual moment. This was a ritual, a way to soften grief, a way to honour the dead, a way to cross a threshold between the waking world and the world of memory, spirit, and emotion. The Scythians believed smoke could carry the soul between realms, and cannabis became the smoke they trusted. Herodotus' words were once questioned, dismissed as exaggeration. But centuries later, something happened. Archaeologists began to open Scythian burial mounds, large dome-shaped earth structures called kurgans, scattered across the grasslands of modern-day Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and southern Siberia. Inside them they found bronze bowls were once used to hold heating stones. A small tripod stands for supporting the bowls, burnt cannabis seeds and flowers, wicker containers filled with dried cannabis. These were not fragments by accident. They were placed intentionally, with care. The cannabis had blackened edges, evidence of burning, not decay. It matched Herodotus' description precisely. The Scythians did not simply use cannabis. They sent it into the air, into themselves, into ritual space. These tents were likely used during funerals or after battle, moments where emotions were heavy and the unseen felt close. Not to escape reality, but to meet it more softly. To understand why the Scythians turned to smoke, imagine their lives, the open steppe, the constant movement, far from cities, far from temples. Their spirituality had no walls, only wind, fire, and sky. Smoke was a natural bridge between worlds. It rose upward, toward the heavens. It surrounded the body like an embrace. It dissolved shape like memory and dream. The Scythians were familiar with plants that could numb pain or sharpen alertness, but cannabis provided a different kind of shift, a softening, a slowing, a doorway into reflection. It did not take the mind away from life. It allowed the mind to see life from another quiet angle. In the heat of the tent, muscles loosened, breathing deepened. The world inside the self grew spacious and quiet. This was stillness, learnt before meditation was a word, and cannabis was the key. If you're imagining people sitting and passing a pipe or a rolled leaf, that will come later in history. The Scythian method was closer to a sauna or steam bath. Stones were heated in a fire outside. Stones were placed into a bowl inside the tent. Hemp flowers and seeds were sprinkled onto the stones. Thick vapour rose, warm and fragrant. People inhaled deeply in the enclosed space. This method did not require specialised tools. It did not require shaping pipes or hollow reeds. It required only firestone. The plant breath simple, human, shared. The earliest cannabis experience was not solitary. It was communal. People entered the smoke together. The effect was not private but collective. Breathing together, feeling together, remembering together. In this way, cannabis became from the beginning a social plant, a plant of gathering and shared presence. What happened inside these smoke tents marks a turning point. This is the first time we can clearly say humans did not only use cannabis, they used it to change consciousness. This moment matters because it tells us something about humanity. We have always searched for ways to understand our feelings, to ease pain, to process grief, to access memory gently, to commune with something larger than ourselves. Cannabis entered our story not as rebellion, not as escape, but as comfort. A plant that sits beside the human heart and places a warm hand on the shoulder. We have followed the cannabis plant from fibre to seed to smoke, from daily life to ritual, from utility to meaning. Next, we will travel into ancient China and India, where cannabis becomes medicine, prayer, and a sacred drink. But for now, rest with the image of the Scythian tent, a small circle of people, the warm glow of heated stones, the gentle rise of fragrant smoke, eyes half closed, breathing together. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, only presence. Take a slow breath in and let it soften out. We will continue soon. As the night deepens and you become more still, let us wander now through two ancient landscapes, the mist-clad mountains and river valleys of China and the sacred plains and temples of India. In each place, the humble green plant we know as cannabis found new roles, not just as rope or clothing, but as medicine, ritual, and a means of reaching beyond the everyday. In China, the legend goes that around 2700 BCE, a wise figure named Shen Nong, sometimes thought of as the divine farmer, tasted hundreds of herbs in his quest to teach people what might heal them. Over time, his knowledge was recorded in what became known as the Sheneng Benkao Jing, Shen Nong's Materia Medica. This text lists many plants and their properties, and among them is the cannabis plant. Source. In this tradition, cannabis was praised for its ability to ease pain, treat rheumatism, and even relieve forgetfulness. Farmers, healers, and herbalists began to notice that the seeds, called ashins in later texts, had gentle moisturizing and laxative properties, while the flowering tops might have stronger effects. Imagine a healer standing beside a gently flowing river, plants drying in the sun, leaves and stems laid out on stone slab tables. The smell is green, it is calm, a seed crushed between fingers, the faint aroma of resin. Cannabis is part of the toolbox of healing. In Daoist alchemical practices, some texts hint that cannabis was used to tune the body's inner energies. The plant was believed to bridge the human and the divine. Though the records are sparse, the notion remains. In China, cannabis was no longer only fibre or food, it became medicine and spirit. Across the mountains and seas, in the plains of what would become India, the plant found another destiny. In the ancient sacred texts known as the Vedas, compiled between about 1500 and 500 BCE, cannabis, called bhang among other names, is listed as one of the 5 sacred plants. In these hymns, it is praised as a joy giver, a liberator, a plant that helps the mind loosen its burdens. The deity Shiva, in Hindu myth, is closely connected to cannabis. One legend says that he rested under a leafy plant, tasted its leaves, and was restored. Thereafter, the plant became his favourite, and he earned the title Lord of Bhang, and so cannabis entered rituals and ceremonies. One popular preparation was the drink bhang, leaves and flowers ground into a paste mixed with milk, almonds and spices. Served during festivals like Holi, it was both festive and sacred. In the traditional Indian system of medicine, Ayurveda, cannabis was used for digestive disorders, pain, fever, and even anxiety. Picture a temple courtyard, incense in the air, priests and worshippers gathering. Someone offers bhang, quiet laughter, a subtle hum of chanting. The body relaxes, the world softens, the divine seems near. In both China and India, the plant began its journey from utility to meaning. It was no longer just cloth and rope, it was medicine, it was a ritual, it was a bridge. In China, the healer used it to bring comfort. In India, the devotee used it to approach the beyond. In both cases, the answer was the same. The green leaves held more than one kind of power. But note the difference. In China, the emphasis was gentler, medical, and integrated into a large herbal tradition. The seeds and fibres played major roles. The mind-altering aspects are mentioned but less dominant. In India, the emphasis was more spiritual. The plant was part of myth, part of celebration, part of reaching into altered states of consciousness. In both traditions, however, human beings reached for something: relief, depth, transcendence. Cannabis became a companion to humanity's search for meaning. As you lie still, imagine this. You are beside a slow river in ancient China. A healer hands you a small bowl of crushed seed pulp mixed with honey water. You drink. The warmth flows through you. Your limbs relax. You remember long days of work. You feel the ebb of time. The plant helped the healer touch the body kindly. Then you shift scenes. You're in ancient India under night skies, a bonfire stirring shadows on temple walls. Someone hands you a frothy cup of bhang, milk, sugar, cannabis paste, spices. You sip. Laughter around you. Low chanting. You feel light. You see the sky swirl. You feel connected. These are different cultures, separate geographies, but the plant plays a familiar tune. Help the body, expand the mind, gather the soul. This phase of the story is pivotal. Up until now, the plant had served clothes, rope, and seed oil. Now it begins to serve the self, the spirit, the mind. The leaf touches the body in new ways. The seed no longer only feeds. The flower no longer only smells. In China and India, we see the first documented steps of cannabis becoming something more than mundane. We see it cross into the realm of healing, ritual, and spirituality. And though we still haven't reached the smoke-filled tents of the Scythians or the pipes of later societies, we are stepping through doorways into a world where intention accompanies the plant. Next, we will journey west, from India and China into the Middle East, Egypt, Greece, where cannabis travels by trade, where debates about its use begin, where the plant's story intertwines with empire and culture. But for now, breathe gently, feel the warmth of ancient firelight, the scent of dried leaves, the softness of milk-mixed paste. Know the plant's presence in two ancient worlds, quietly profound. Let your mind drift on that stream of memory. Let your thoughts slow. Let the green leaf float beside you, a companion of ages. And as your eyelids grow heavier, let us wander onward soon. As you settle into quiet, let your mind drift westward across deserts and river valleys, from Central Asia's grasses into the richer lands of the Middle East, the Nile and the Mediterranean. Let us trace how the plant we followed through the steppes and the plains moved into new worlds, and how it gained layers of meaning, use and dispute. In the great land of ancient Assyria, powerful, expansive, and steeped in ritual, the plant appears under a curious name, Kunubu, sometimes spelt Kunabu, in Akkadian tablets. The term is linked to hemp or cannabis, and scholars suggest it may mean a way to produce smoke. Several Assyrian records mention that this substance was used in sacred rites, in the shrines of deities, in incense blends, and for medicinal purposes. Picture a temple court in ancient Nineveh or Asher. Priests moving carefully among altars, burning aromatic plants, the smoke rising toward carved reliefs of winged bulls. Among the incense ingredients might have been cannabis resin, tied to ritual purification or altered states. The Assyrians offer a bridge. Here is a culture that recognized the plant's special quality, perhaps its aroma, its smoke, its power to transform a moment. The word Kunubu eventually filters into other languages, evolving into the Greek cannabis and then into the Latin cannabis. This linguistic trail shows a plant not just used but talked about, moved, renamed, and reimagined as it entered new spaces. Moving then into the land of the Nile, we find the plant in one of humanity's earliest extensive medical texts, the Ebers Papyrus, dated around 1550 BCE. In this long scroll, dozens of remedies are listed for ailments of the eyes, skin, uterus, and more. Among the ingredients is the plant known as shem shemet, likely cannabis, used in some prescriptions. One recipe, for example, suggests hemp ground in honey, inserted into the womb to cool the uterus and eliminate its heat. Another mentions its use for inflammation, eye complaints, or as part of mixtures applied externally. Imagine a physician in ancient Thebes, scented oils on the table, papyrus scrolls unrolled, the patient lying still while a paste is prepared. The plant's role in healing begins to show here, not just as fibre for rope, but as medicine for the body. The Egyptian texts present it as part of a system that mixes ritual, observation, and herbal knowledge. Yet there is little evidence in Egypt of smoking cannabis for trance or euphoria, at least not clearly documented. Instead, its presence is quiet, medicinal, practical. The plant is entering the world of the serious in Egypt: health, ritual, and remedy. As the plant travels further west into Greek and Mediterranean lands, it enters cultures that both embrace and question it. The Greek historian Herodotus, in his accounts of the Scythians, remarks on their use of hemp smoke in tents. This may be the same plant we've been following. The Greeks adopted the word cannabis to refer to hemp and possibly resinous forms. In the Mediterranean, hemp is valued for rope and sails, for cloth and nets, but the psychoactive uses remain somewhat foreign, or at least not dominant in the Greek world. Greek physicians like Dioscorides mention the plant mainly for fibre or as a general remedy. Some Greek thinkers view altered states and intoxication with suspicion, so cannabis's smoke or resin usage becomes part of fringe practices or exotic cultures beyond Greece's narrow mainstream. Thus, there is tension between the plant's practical utility, rope, cloth, medicine, and its power to alter consciousness. The Mediterranean becomes a site of cultural friction. Traders bring new ideas, new forms of cannabis use. Philosophers debate the value of altered states. Physicians catalogue the plant's role. Sailors and merchants carry hemp on ships. This fusion of cultures, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece, means that cannabis is no longer isolated. It is globalizing, moving across languages, uses, fabrics, and beliefs. In this era of empires and trade routes, the plant's spread is tied to movement, of armies, merchants, and priests. The Assyrian incense blends travel. Egyptian papyri are copied and shared. Mediterranean ships carry hemp rope and possibly the knowledge of resin. Each society picks up a version of the plant. Some emphasize hemp fibre, others the medicinal leaf, others its smoke. The plant becomes a polyform, a rope, a medicine, a ritual smoke. It is part of trade, part of war, part of culture. When sailors tie their sails with hemp rope, they may not intend the plant's psychoactive side, but the plant's many sides remain there, putting down roots in many soils. Now allow your mind to wander for a moment into a quiet port on the Mediterranean. A wooden ship is anchored, sails folded, workers tying thick hemp ropes. Nearby, incense drifts from a temple of the city goddess. The aroma hints of resin and herbs. Within the city, a physician pores over a papyrus scroll, fanning ash from the candle, eyeing the list of plants for treatment. The world holds cannabis quietly in its fields, in its workshops, in its temples. Breathe in slowly. Feel the trade winds, the distant clank of oars, the rustle of ropes, the flicker of lamplight on papyrus. Because here, cannabis moves beyond its early world and enters empires, trade, medicine, and ritual. Its story becomes entwined with human history more visibly. We see how a plant can travel across cultures, can be adapted, renamed, and reused. We see how the meaning of cannabis changes depending on context. Incense in Assyria, medicine in Egypt, fibre in Greece, and plausible smoke in steppe rituals. And that means the next chapters will show even more diversity. From the crusading sands of the Islamic world, to colonial trade routes, to modern eras. But tonight we pause here with the Assyrians' temple smoke, the Egyptian physician's remedy, the Greek ship's rope. In these overlapping moments, we sense that cannabis has become embedded in human society. Now let your eyelids grow heavier. Let the ancient incense drift away. Let the papyrus roll softly into darkness. Let the rope untwine. Let the sails settle. The plant lies in many fields, many cultures, and you, listening, are drifting too. Next, we will wander into the Middle Ages, to Islam's world of medicine and mystics, where cannabis becomes hashish and travels into Europe. But for now, breathe and rest. As the world shifted from the early medieval years into the age of empires, trade, faith and knowledge, the plant we've been following, our green companion, found new significance in the lands of the Middle East, North Africa and Europe. In particular, within the vast and vibrant cultures of the Islamic world, and then beyond into Europe, cannabis took on roles of healing, mysticism, trade and sometimes controversy. Tonight we enter those corridors of history, the medieval mosque, the Sufi circle, the folk medicine hut, and the quiet superstition of rural Europe. Between the 8th and 13th centuries CE, the Islamic world entered what historians call the Islamic Golden Age, a time when science, philosophy, medicine and trade flourished under the caliphates. Within this environment, cannabis was known not only as a material for rope or cloth, but also as a medicinal and sometimes psychoactive plant. Arabic physicians documented the plant's use for pain, epilepsy, digestive disorders, inflammation and more. In this world, the term hashish, from Arabic hashish, meaning grass or dried herb, came into use for the concentrated resin of the cannabis plant. While smoking in the modern sense may not always have been the norm yet, ingestion or inhalation of cannabis preparations certainly appears in numerous texts and reports from this period. Imagine a scholar-physician in Baghdad, scrolls opened on his low table, lamps flickering. A patient complains of tremors or persistent pain. The physician mixes a remedy, perhaps cannabis resin, syrup, honey, maybe other herbs. He notes how the patient sleeps more calmly, how the pain dulls. The plant is no longer marginal, the plant is part of medicine. In parallel with its medical role, cannabis entered spiritual circles. Some Sufi mystics, Islamic spiritual practitioners, used cannabis preparation to ease the body and still the mind, preparing for sessions of contemplation, ritual, or ecstatic states. One 13th century text describes the pipe of hashish for Sufis as nafir-e wahdat, the trumpet of unity with God. Source: the idea, the plant might help reduce the knots of the body, loosen the grip of distraction, and allow the soul to drift more deeply into remembrance. These uses were often clandestine, or at least not publicly endorsed, because mainstream religious authorities debated the permissibility of intoxicants. So you could imagine a quiet night in a desert caravanserai, merchant tents, camels grazing nearby, incense drifting. A Sufi dervish sits cross-legged. He quietly takes a small portion of hashish resin, inhales the vapour, and enters a state where the ordinary dissolves. The candle flickers. He sees patterns in the shadows. He feels connected. He hums softly. The world outside fades. The world inside opens. While the major centres of Islamic learning embraced cannabis in their medicinal and mystical repertoire in Europe, the story was more muted. The plant remained known for fibre, for rope, for its industrial uses. Its psychoactive medicinal potential was less visible in mainstream European texts until later centuries. References appear in folk medicine, anecdotal remedies, and rural traditions. For instance, in the villages of medieval Europe, a healer might apply hemp-derived salves for pain or use an infusion for sleep. But the discussion of the plant's mind-altering effects was often edged out by superstition, church doctrine, and limited botanical knowledge. Meanwhile, trade between the Islamic world and Europe through Spain, Sicily, the Mediterranean ports brought hemp fibre, perhaps cannabis resin, and ideas about plants. This subtle westward slip of the plant and its uses set the stage for fuller recognition later. You might picture a traveller arriving in a Mediterranean harbour. He carries bales of hemp rope from the east. He also hears whispers of strange green preparations that calm the soul. He steps into the marketplace. He senses an aroma. He wonders. The plant's story is migrating. But along with acceptance came tension. In the Islamic world, some legal and religious scholars condemned hashish as akin to alcohol intoxication, and therefore forbidden. Others pointed to its medicinal value. The debates were real. One 14th century ruler in Egypt reportedly ordered that cannabis plants be destroyed because of their use among common people. In Europe too, suspicion grew. The Church's position on intoxication, the fear of witchcraft, and the ignorance of medicinal cannabis properties, these slowed the plant's full embrace as a healing or ritual substance. There were folk stories, yes, of hemp madness, of strange dreams after certain preparations. But large-scale documented use is harder to find. Thus, cannabis in the Middle Ages wandered between respect and fear. It is medicine. It is a mystic tool. It is taboo. It is hidden, whispered about, sometimes celebrated, sometimes suppressed. By the end of this medieval chapter, cannabis has shifted further. It is spindled into the wheels of medicine, mysticism, and material culture. The fibre industry thrives. The resin trade quietly grows. The spiritual seekers quietly explore its effects. The skeptical scholars quietly warn. All the while, the plant remains ever flexible, rope, remedy, ritual. Think of a quiet night in Cairo, 12th century. A medical scholar reads an Arabic manuscript. He pauses to note, hashish is good for the pain of the womb, or for calming nerves. Meanwhile, outside, folk women talk of bowls of infusions, of the green reed, of easier sleep. On the rooftops, poets write verses about longing and union, the words sometimes suggestive of altered states. The plant is present in the world of knowledge and also in the world of night. Now let your breath slow further. Imagine you're in a courtyard of a medieval hospital. Lantern light, gentle air, the scent of herbs. A healer gently knocks a pestle against a mortar. Leaves, resin, honey. The plant's green scent lifts. A patient lies still. Comfort comes. Then you move to the desert circle of Sufis. The drum is silent. The candle flame is still. The slow drift of vapour rises. The world inside the tent widens. Time stretches. Mystics murmur. They feel one with the infinite. Then you cross the sea into a European village. The hemp fields stand tall. The rope is made. The cloth is sewn. The green plant serves the body's needs quietly, without ceremony. Each scene is different, but the same plant threads through them. Each scene is a step in a journey. And now, you rest. Next, we will travel onward to the age of colonial trade, prohibition, modern medicine, and the plant's global journey. But for now, let your mind linger in these twilight years of the Middle Ages. Let the lanterns dim. Let the drum rest. Let the green leaves hush. As evening deepens and the world around you slows, we glide into a chapter of history that feels both wide and heavy. It is a story of movement, of plants, people, ideas, and of change. The green companion we have followed so far now becomes woven into commerce, empire, fear, and law. We step into the era of colonial trade, of new lands, of early recreational use, and eventually the long path toward prohibition. When European powers expanded across oceans in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, they carried many things with them: ships, weapons, settlers, and crops. Among those crops was hemp, for fibre, and along with it, cannabis as a psychoactive plant travelled too. In Africa, the plant had already been used in diverse local cultures. Research shows that cannabis cultivation and use in parts of Africa predates colonial rule. People used it medicinally, for social use, and in ritual settings. In the Americas and the Caribbean, the story is complex. Hemp was planted for rope and sailcloth, especially important for ships and colonial economies. But along with hemp fibre came the knowledge, sometimes brought by indentured workers or enslaved people, of the plant's other uses. Some historians note that cannabis smoking and herbal use arrived in the Caribbean via Indian indentured labour after emancipation. and so the plant left its old world homes and entered new continents. Fields of hemp cropped up in the Americas, seeds and plants moved across regions. Cannabis became global in a different way, not only as a prosperity crop, but as a plant people carried with them for more than fibre. Once the plant arrived in new lands, its uses shifted. Recreational or social smoking of cannabis began to appear more visibly in some places. For example, in the United States during the early 1900s, Mexican immigrants introduced the recreational use of marijuana. That social use triggered fear among parts of the dominant society. Cannabis use became associated with immigrant communities, with jazz musicians, with racialized anxieties. In Africa, colonial authorities observed local patterns of cannabis use and began to regulate them. One example, in the British Natal colony in modern South Africa, in 1870, cannabis smoking and use by coolie indentured workers was prohibited. These early laws reflect the connection between racialized labour, empire, and the plant's regulation. At the same time, hemp fibre remained legal, useful, and unthreatening. But the plant's psychoactive side began to unsettle colonial authorities. The rising recreational use, mixed with fear of social change, led to shifting attitudes. What was once a tolerated plant became seen as a problem if used in certain ways by certain people. As the 20th century dawned, new laws began to appear. In the United States, the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 made federal regulation of cannabis for non-medical use the norm. Many states had already banned or regulated cannabis leaf by the 1920s. Globally, cannabis was added to international treaties. In the 1925 Geneva Opium Convention, for instance, Indian hemp was included for the first time. Thus, the plant's regulation was not just national, it became international. Why did such sweeping laws appear? Several forces combined: the fear of intoxicants by authorities, racial and immigrant prejudice, economic interests such as competition between hemp fibre industries and other materials, and the rise of modern policing of drugs. Propaganda also played its part. In the United States, for example, cannabis was painted as a menace tied to minorities and violence, despite weak evidence to support such claims. And so the plant that once travelled freely became the plant that had to be hidden, controlled, taxed, or prohibited. The Green Companion demoted from medicine or ritual aid, in many places, to a symbol of deviance or danger. It is worth pausing to reflect quietly on how this transition took shape. Empire always measures risk and value. Which plant benefits trade? Which plant threatens order? Cannabis as fibre crop was useful, but as a psychoactive plant used socially and recreationally, it challenged hierarchies and norms. In colonial Africa, for instance, authorities often looked at cannabis use among indigenous populations and thought about labour productivity, discipline and social order. Bans or restrictions were introduced not purely for health reasons, but for social control. In the Americas, as migrations intensified and urban societies changed, cannabis used by certain groups was framed as a threat to civilized society, again reflecting power and prejudice. So prohibition is not simply because the plant is dangerous. It is also a story of economies, labour, race, empire and law. Now imagine softly a ship's deck in the late 1800s. The sails are furled, hemp ropes are thick and weather-worn, a crate marked hemp fibre is tied down. Beneath deck, passengers talk quietly. Some carry papers about new labour in the Caribbean, some whisper of smoking leaves they saw in the port city's tavern. Shift to a colonial African plantation. Workers in long rows, overseers in khaki. Hemp grown in one field, cannabis leaf used secretly at dusk. Authorities are watching, applying laws imported from faraway capitals. Shift again to a 1930s American city. Jazz music pours from a club. Outside, police patrol. The word marijuana becomes a headline. The culture changes. The the law catches up. Because in this era, we see how the green plant's meaning has changed radically. It was no longer only spiritual, only medicinal, only fibre. It became regulated, criminalised, and contraband. The story of cannabis becomes a story of conflict between freedom and control, between utility and fear, between plant and policy. And as you lie quietly, you might sense how such shifts echo in our world today. The same plant, different laws, different attitudes. The centuries may have passed, but the threads of history remain. But for now, breathe gently. Feel the vast seas, the colonial ports, the fields in Africa, the hushed conversations in city alleys, and the law books that followed. The green leaf travels still, carried by time, carried by people, carried by ideas, and you, still in the quiet, drift with it. Good night.